Normally doing the podcast doesn't really feel like work. It's definitely not working on an oil rig. But I think that's especially going to be true with today. It's been nearly a year, I think, since we met. How do you know Dimitri? We met through our mutual friend, Dimitri, from LGFG. But how far do you guys go back?
Okay. Speaking of LGFG, this smoking jacket and shirt are LGFG.
Worn on camera. There we go.
Yeah. And how do I know Dimitri? I became a client of LGFG in 2015. And I was a lawyer. I believe I was a lawyer for a large national property and casualty insurer, and I used to work at this other firm, this big box defense firm in Atlantic, Canada, the preeminent defense law firm, and they had worked with some of my former colleagues, and so I got a phone call from a gentleman named Andrew MacArthur, who used to work with LGFG, and wanted to meet with me. In any event, I met with him. I had a tremendously positive experience, and over the years, I continued to deal with LGFG for my professional wardrobe. And in 2023, October, I met Dimitri in person in London, England. And he's become a very good friend.
Yeah, well, he's definitely somebody that, if they're not familiar with, I highly encourage to check out. We were talking about your setup for filming today, and I just got a new apartment. I'm in the divorced dad stage of furnishing my new apartment, where it still looks like a bit of a mess, but we're getting there slowly. I think Dimitri's the only person.
Where are you located?
I'm in Austin, Texas now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So from Chicago to Austin.
Yeah, it's a lot warmer. I can say that.
I bet.
For sure.
I bet.
Yeah, it's a nice welcome change, actually. And I think Dimitri's the only person I've ever spoken to on webcam who sat in an actual throne during the conversation.
Yes, goals. I would love to have a throne for my office, and I love that gold throne in his setup. It's very him. He also has a cape sometimes that he wears. True story.
Oh, I've not seen that.
Yeah, I have a photograph.
I thought I was in the inner circle, but I haven't even seen the cape yet.
One of my so Dimitri is Ukrainian and just a great friend. I love the guy, and I introduced him to another friend of mine, an Armenian gentleman, when we were together with Rob Schneider in Calgary, Canada, and my Armenian friend is a tremendous alpinist hunter and an unbelievably talented, formerly ranked marksman, and he had been called to perform a cull for a group of timber wolves that were, I guess, terrorizing a northern community. And he went and he took care of them. And he gave me this beautiful timber wolf pelt. And he also gifted a lighter colored one to Dimitri. And you may see it on the top of his throne. He's got it over the top of his throne like this. Yeah.
Yeah. I love stuff like that. And now I'm in Texas. I do want to add a bit more of a rustic feel to the place. But I also think it's something that you have to do authentically. Like what just happened with you, where you have a kind of story. If you just go on Amazon and Google Longhorn, it's not the same.
Correct. I mean, look, as you said, things like that need to be organic and they need to be authentic. And that's, I think, pretty much everything in life, certainly that a man does, is you want to be authentic. You want to be expressing your authentic self and be who you are. And I think that that's quite important. And, organic expressions are generally the coolest expressions, and things that are not authentic often fall flat.
Yeah, I think that's true, unless they are so inauthentic that it almost becomes authentic. Like Ralph Lauren. Jewish kid from the Bronx.
Fair.
I'm going to pretend to be basically a Kennedy, and I'm going to look better at it than the Kennedys while I'm doing it.
Yeah, well, yeah, I suppose if you're so brazen.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
I mean, I think that probably there's an element of confidence in there, right?
That
that's
true.
You're going to be bold and you're going to be confident.
Sometimes I wonder what's more authentic for people. It's is doing what everybody else expects of you and what the people around you are doing authentic, or is just doing whatever you feel even if it doesn't necessarily correlate with your current situation or what people think you are. If you genuinely feel that way and you just have an urge to express that, then I think that's authentic. But that probably comes out more in artistic people when they're creating something bigger than themselves.
I think that's an excellent observation. Yeah. There's something to be said for that, for artistic people. And I know, James, through our interactions back in London and since, you have a tremendous sense of style. And, obviously, that probably comes from some artistic predilections that you have. And because I've met people, and it's interesting because some people have this tremendous sense of style, whether it's decorating a room, whether it's putting an outfit together, or whether it's designing, a meal for a dinner party, and you're tremendously good at that. And I've met people over the years, and I'm sure that you've had people come to you for advice where they lack that inherent sense of style or design. How do I dress myself? You know what I mean? Like where somebody might say, look, how do I put together an outfit, or how do I look a certain way? And that's interesting. So I wonder if that is linked to people's sort of, an inherent artistic nature. And then people that don't have that. So. I mean, what do you think?
I appreciate you saying that, first off. I think there really are many different forms of intelligence. And I was confounded with that the other day when I went to put together a chest of drawers that I purchased. And I opened the instructions, and it's like my brain just stopped working the moment I try and do this relatively simple mechanical task, or it's like if I lift up the hood of a car, I don't understand it, and then there are people that have the same kind of level of confusion about things that to me are just really inherent and natural. So I think that's where it comes in. And then for men who find themselves either needing or wanting to dress well, that's when you start to go online and you find those resources, or you find those people, just in the same way that the first time I ever realized I needed to change the oil in my car, I just went on YouTube and looked it up. So I think it's cool that we have those resources now for, things that your dad didn't teach you. You can go and find them on the internet.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, and it's true. And I think that we discussed this, in March of 2025 when we were speaking in London. You were talking to me about some of your inspirations and some of the resources that you had availed yourself of. And obviously I'm much older than you. I'm close to 50 years old. And, the books that are available, things that are available on the internet and YouTube, influencers like yourself and the content you create, none of that existed when I was your age. I was born in 1978. I do think in some ways, wow, what a time to be a young person and be able to avail yourself of those resources, things I wish I could have had access to when I was growing up, because it was all sort of trial and error, and there was no opportunity to go online or seek guidance. You just sort of had to find your own way, comparatively speaking. For example, I would have loved to read 12 Rules for Life by Dr. Jordan Peterson when I was a young man. I would have loved to read Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, or Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. And there's plenty of examples like that. And then listening to podcasts with those gentlemen, whether it be life advice, whether it be about topics that are interesting, I think that's tremendous for young people to who actually want to invest time like that, and whether it be to better themselves or educate themselves, et cetera. And I get the impression that you've done a lot of that yourself, James, and to very good result.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, specifically 12 Rules for Life. I remember buying that book when it came out. I was 18 when that book came out. So it's like the perfect kind of timing, really. And I read it just after I'd started college. So it's the first time living by yourself. And like a lot of students who get to live by themselves for the first time, they're a bit of a mess, right? So reading that book really was the first time that I'd actually been introduced to a more disciplined way of living, because it wasn't really something that my parents drilled into me, and I didn't have any kind of like military schooling or anything like that. So I think that generation and people that are slightly older than me kind of grew up in the peak era of more liberal parenting styles and just a more liberal culture, which left a lot of us kind of just drifting around. And then when that type of content started to emerge, I think it's no surprise that we just lapped it up, because it was the first time that we actually had rules and structure.
Yeah, and it does benefit people tremendously, and I think to myself, I wish I had have been more disciplined with my time when I was younger. And I mean, obviously I had a degree of discipline and I always had specific goals that I was trying to achieve. But there was a fair amount of time spent on frivolous things that could have been better focused towards return on investment pursuits. Perhaps a little bit less time, little bit less time on the Xbox, in my 20s.
Well, you told me some pretty interesting stuff about your upbringing and kind of how you started out life as a young man. I would love to go a bit more into that.
Sure.
Where do you think we should start?
Oh my. Well, we can start pretty young. I'd be happy to talk about it. I will say this. This was quoted by a lawyer that I used to work with, a brilliant and prolific trial lawyer who got appointed to the bench and became a judge. And he said something, and I know that this quote comes from somebody else, but he said, if I've seen farther, it's from standing on the shoulders of giants. And I would suggest that any meager success that I've enjoyed in my life is largely attributable to other people that have been in my life. So I guess I'll start by talking about my father. I was raised from about grade 6, grade 7, I was raised by a single father who is still alive today. I'm very close to him. I was speaking with him this morning on the phone on my way into work. And, he came from a very humble background and did not have an education and had been a blue-collar laborer throughout his life and had done reasonably well in that respect. He was very financially disciplined and very family-oriented, and he invested a lot in his family. He had an industrial accident. He worked in the drilling industry on an offshore drilling rig and had several discs in his back broken. He was crushed between drilling pipe suspended from a crane, and it swung. And anyway, he was seriously injured and in bed, not capable of doing much for a very long time. And my recollection, I think I was in late elementary school back then, but I think that there was some concern on whether or not he would regain the full use of his legs and be able to walk. And anyway, he did recover from that to a degree. I don't know that he was ever 100%, but he began managing like a bar nightclub in the small fishing village that I'm from. And I remember when I was very young, he came to me and he had this specific plan mapped out. And he said, look, I can do a pretty good impression of him, but I won't do that now. But he said, look, I was never good at reading and, and writing, and, struggle with literacy. And that is your ability to communicate. And that's incredibly important. And it's important that you learn to master these skills. And he bought me, going back a little bit further before it was just me and him, but he bought me the Chronicles of Narnia. And he said, look, I don't know what's in here. I think it's dragons and wizards and stuff. I think you'll like it. You should read these books. I was in grade 4. And he also purchased with these books that were on my nightstand, a Webster Pocket Dictionary Thesaurus. And then he gave me one of his rig tally books. They're like these little tall, thin notebooks and a pencil. And he said, anytime you run into a word that you don't know, I want you to write it down, look it up in the dictionary, and learn it. And so grade 4, I burned through the Chronicles of Narnia. I'm sure a lot of your audience might be familiar with it, whether through books or movies. And then graduated to, more adult 300, 400, 500-page novels, grade 5, grade 6. I was reading Stephen King by the time I was in grade 6. And not that I'm recommending that for young people. But it really, I've always had strong literacy skills as a result of that, due to my father's deliberate design, where he was trying to correct a perceived shortcoming in himself in his son, which I think is pretty commendable. And, so after that happened, I remember him saying, you need to, I was a little bit older, anyway, he said, now you need to learn about people. And he said, I'm paraphrasing, these aren't his exact words, but he said, the best way to learn about people is to observe them when they're disinhibited. So I think you should work at a bar. Or work at the bar, because he was managing the place. And so I started working there, in bussing tables and doing different things, and observing sort of humanity in disinhibited states. And you do learn a lot from doing that, from people watching. And pretty young, that was sort of my high school time frame. And, another thing, he's like, you need to learn to handle yourself. You need to learn to be comfortable with conflict. And so when I was younger, we're talking about 80s and 90s, I was in karate. The Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu wasn't a thing yet, or Muay Thai. It certainly wasn't accessible back then. So I did that. And then I had a friend, Matthew Vaughn, whose father was a martial arts instructor. And they had a gym in the basement, a martial arts gym, and boxing equipment. And, we started boxing. And again, that was my father's influence. So this is important. You have to be comfortable with conflict. Not that you would ever seek it out, but you need to deal with it if it finds you, or if you need to protect yourself or someone else. And then, again, working at the bar, as I got a little older, it's like, okay, now you're going to work on the door, and you're going to learn how to manage conflict. And I don't know how that would be perceived today, but in the late 90s, it made a lot of sense. And I remember my father, and then researching which university, the man that has no post-secondary education and didn't, I don't believe, finished high school. I remember him doing a ton of research, and I remember him encouraging me to go to Acadia University. Oh, they have the best teacher-to-student ratios, and they have the Acadia Advantage program. It was 1997, and they had laptops, which were sort of a new thing, and every student got a laptop. And he's like, look, computers are going to become very important in the future. It's important that you have a facility with computers, and I think that this university would be a good idea. And so I went to Acadia University, and became conversant with computers and all the computer programs, et cetera. And he didn't ask much of me growing up. He gave me a tremendous amount of freedom, but one of his very strict rules was, you must do well in school. It is imperative that you get good grades, and you will study. And I respect my father enormously, and rather than rebel against my father. And I know that it's common for there to be friction between adolescents and teenagers and their parents. I never had that with my father. I always viewed him as a close friend and a confidant, and I knew that he wanted what was best for me, and I listened to what he said, and I took his advice very seriously. And so I did well in school, and then perhaps the most important part of my education, the best part of my education, was you need to learn about hard work. I think you should try and get a job in the drilling industry. And at the time, I'm from a province called Nova Scotia in Canada. So it's just above Maine in the U.S. It's on the East Coast. They had a project opening up. It was called the Sable Offshore Energy Project. And there was a lot of offshore drilling going on. And there was a ton of companies. And so I started sending resumes. And I wasn't finished undergrad yet. I thought it would take maybe a year or two to get a job, because they were getting 1,000 applications a week, right? At the time, or historically, I don't know that I would say it's true today, but certainly in the 70s and 80s, and then, before it started to taper off, being involved in the drilling industry was really sort of the apex of the blue collar world. You could make very good money doing that work. And, we had a modest background, and I had to finance my education. I didn't want to come out with a 6-figure debt. So I started applying, and I actually got an interview far quicker than I expected. it was a company, I don't believe it exists anymore. It was called Global Santa Fe, or Santa Fe, and then it became Global Santa Fe Drilling. They're always merging. And it was an oil rig called the Galaxy 2 off the coast of Sable Island, off the coast of Nova Scotia, and self-elevating, ultra harsh environment drilling unit, jack-up drilling rig, one with legs. And I actually got hired, but I hadn't graduated university yet. But I didn't want to pass up the opportunity, so I took the job, and I was flying offshore onto the rig for 2 weeks and working, and then going back to Acadia University for 2 weeks. And so I did that, leapfrogging. Fortunately, I had very, very accommodating professors. They allowed me to do that and allowed me to work my exams around my schedule. Thank you to all of them. And managed to keep that job, graduate, stayed at that job for several years while I took care of my student debt before I took the next step, which was law school.
A quick thank you to today's sponsor, Ota. Ota is one of those brands that I've been a paying customer of long before they were interested in sponsoring the show, which is why I'm so happy to bring them to you today. If you're into menswear at all, shirts, ties, cufflinks, the things that really elevate an outfit, Ota has an incredible selection of both classic designs and more modern, expressive pieces. The company was founded by two brothers down under, and I can tell you, these guys truly care about their customers and creating the best products around. They also do fast worldwide shipping. Ota is offering a discount for listeners of the Gentleman's Collective podcast. Use the code JamesLawley10 at ota.com for a 10% discount. If you are upgrading your wardrobe this year, start with one of their shirts, neckties, or cufflinks. They make a bigger difference than most people realize. So that's JamesLawley10 at ota.com for 10% off.
And
so what was your undergrad at the time?
My undergrad was in English and sociology.
That must have been such a contrast to go from the oil rig to the campus every 2 weeks.
Oh, James, it was interesting. I've heard a lot of people compare the drilling industry to prison culture. And I've worked with people that had done some time, and they said this is way worse than being in the penitentiary. You're incredibly isolated on that rig. You had 75 guys in the middle of the ocean on a pretty small triangular piece of metal for 14 days at a time. And then later my drilling career was 21 days at a time. So not much to do except heavy labor and surrounded by a bunch of guys. So I would expect that the pecking order and some of the interactions that emerge might be similar to other environments. But so it took quite a while for me to socially integrate as a student with other aspirations, because you have a lot of general, and I mean, I'm going to say something right now. What I learned in the drilling industry and how that benefited me vastly outweighs anything I ever learned in a university. 100%. Tremendous respect for what those guys do. It's a tremendously hard job. It's difficult. It's important. And you have to have a certain amount of grit to do that job long term. So I don't at all want to be perceived as casting aspersions on that. I gained a lot from that industry. And I think nostalgically about that time. But back to what I was saying is it took some time for me to socially integrate into that environment, being a university student, when you've got, a bunch of rough, hardcore, capable blue collar guys. It took about, I don't know, we'll say 14 months.
Yeah. The guys that were kind of at the top of that hierarchy, socially at least, what kind of characteristics would you say they had in common?
Oh, that's a very good question. There's different groups, different things would benefit people. You had some guys who were incredibly stoic, said little, worked hard, were dependable, and didn't gossip or engage in foolishness, but were serious guys, and they did well. I had one crane operator that I worked for by the name of Joe Gillis from Cape Breton. think he used to work in a mine before he worked on the rigs, if I recall correctly. One of the best men I ever worked for. And I would put him in the stoic category. Then there's another type of individual who actually worked with Joe. I worked for both of them. His name was Craig Sampson, from Sydney Mines, Nova Scotia. And he was a humorous guy, always told jokes, got along with everybody, was funny, storyteller, a lot of charisma, and just fun to be around. I mean, as you might expect, doing heavy labor, for weeks on end, either in blistering summer heat reflecting off the steel or a negative 50 degrees in February, a little bit of levity and some fun goes a long way. So I would say those were the two personages that I observed having the most success in those environments socially.
Who struggled the most or would not make it?
People that didn't have a requisite degree of physical and mental fortitude. Mental fortitude is incredibly important. You're separated from your family. If you're married, you have a wife. They're alone for weeks and you're in isolation with your thoughts. That's challenging. You're away from your children. If you have children, you miss birthdays, you miss Christmas, you miss, holidays or important family events. That's got to be, I don't have children myself, but that has to be tremendously difficult. And then, the work is hard, 12, 13-hour shifts. If you're tripping into the hole, I mean, you're just pushing drill pipe on a drill floor all day. And everything is heavy. The equipment's heavy, the slips, the manual tongs. If anybody's ever watched Landman, the scenes that it shows on an oil rig, now those are land rigs, not offshore, but it's pretty accurate. It's pretty accurate with respect to what that looks like. I enjoy the show tremendously because it makes me think of my previous career. But physical fortitude. So everything's heavy. You're exhausted, and in the summertime it is insanely hot, and in the wintertime it is insanely cold. I know that we were anyway. It gets pretty unpleasant. So you have to have a degree of physical and mental fortitude to be able to do that job long term. And if you don't have it, you're not going to survive in that environment.
So when did the law start becoming appealing to you, rather than continue working there for the rest of your life?
So this is a good question. And I checked myself mentally when I was talking about sort of the influence that my father has had on my development. I left part of that out. Okay. So when I was 15 years old, I decided that I wanted to be a lawyer. Why? What does a 15-year-old know about law? Nothing. But there was a lawyer in the town that I grew up in, and I'm from a town called Yarmouth, Nova Scotia. It's a small fishing village at the southern tip of the province. God, how many people live there? I don't even know if there's 5,000 people there now. In the 80s, it might have been more like 10,000. The town was doing much better. But anyway, there was this lawyer named Philip J. Starr, and primarily a criminal lawyer, but a very good, well-respected lawyer and a well-respected member of the community. And I didn't know what a lawyer did. I knew that, I came from a very humble background, and I knew that he seemed to be thriving. But even more important than that, it seemed that everybody respected him and what he did. So to my sort of juvenile sensibilities, that was appealing. It's like, ooh, I'd like to be like him one day. And I told my father, I remember I was in grade 10. And my father says, look, what do you want to do with your life? What do you want to be? And I said, I think I want to be a lawyer. And I remember he was sitting on the couch and he grabs the phone, dials the number. Phil, the boy says he wants to get into law. I'm sending him down to your office. I want you to talk to him about being a lawyer. And then he said, okay, son. Good. And he had a firm. It's gone through several iterations. Pink Star, Murphy Barrow, names over the years as different people have joined the partnership. But anyway, so I walked down from our house in South End on Argyle Street, walked down to Main Street, I don't know, kilometer and a half maybe, and went in and asked for Phil, and they took me to the back. His office was in the back, and he had like this beautiful law library, in the back, and a big, nice desk and these big leather chairs. And I sat down, and he took a fair amount of time that afternoon to speak to me about the business and practice of law. And I never understood until I became a lawyer the value of his time, because when I left, he said, you call me anytime and you come and see me anytime, and I'll be very happy to talk to you. And I did through high school, and I did through undergrad. And when I graduated undergrad and was just working on the rig, I maintained that relationship and continued to talk to him, and he always made time for me. And yeah, I'll never forget that. The value of it was tremendous. And when I became a practicing lawyer, I realized, oh my, the demands on that man's time, and he always made time for me. So that's where that came from. I would view Phil as one of my early mentors. And and if we can just change gears here for a minute, I want to talk about that. And like I said, anything I've done or had success at, it's often through the influence and the benefit of other people. Nobody does everything all by themselves. And as I've gotten older, I've really, really come to appreciate the value of mentorship. And I think that everybody does need mentors. And I would describe it like this. Everybody should have junior mentors, peer mentors, and senior mentors. Because you get different things from different demographics. And I have some young people that I'm fortunate to be connected to. I would say that you're one of them, James. We talk about different things, whether it be fashion or contemporary masculinity, or if we're just, conversing about watches, which is something that I'm passionate about. I get your younger perspective, your fresh perspective, and you grew up in a different time than me. So during our conversations, I'm often, inspired or stimulated, think about things in a different way, which I find is incredibly helpful. I have another gentleman, Dr. Eris Lavanos, and he articled under me. He's a lawyer and a doctor. He's a practicing physician who then went to law school, and he articled under me. He's since gone on to start his own medical malpractice law firm. A fair bit younger than me, but absolutely exceptional, brilliant young man. And actually, I'm going to go see him after we finish talking today.
Tell him I said
hello. I absolutely will.
For a little while.
Oh yes, yes. You actually, I'm sorry. Yes, you met my friend Eris in London.
Yeah.
Okay, so
in touch. Yeah. It's been a little while.
You have. That's amazing guy. In fact, we're actually going to meet with LGFG tonight. Our person with LGFG in Canada is Marta Luxton. She's fantastic. So we're going to maybe have a bourbon and a cigar and catch up. But anyway, so there's the junior mentors, and me and Eris will talk about law, the practice of law, and he's starting out his own firm. And again, keeps me stimulated and engaged, and there's tremendous benefit there. Then you want peer mentors, people your own age, and I'm blessed to have a couple great people I would consider peer mentors that we talk about, whether it's another lawyer, CW, a guy that I used to practice with when I was a defense guy, who I would say is one of the best litigation lawyers in the province, and we talk pretty much every morning on the way to work and then on the way home from work, talking about life, talking about our business, bouncing things off each other. And I gained tremendous utility from that relationship. He was actually the best man at my wedding when I was married in 2023. And I get a ton, he's like a brother, or the gentleman that, gave me this Timberwolf belt, Armin Papazian, out in Calgary. He's involved. Actually, we met on the drilling rigs, and he's gone on, and he's an entrepreneur now in the oil field. He's done really well, and again, like a brother to me. I get tremendous advice from him, support when I need it, etc. And then, Coach Greg Doucette, IFBB Pro, another person in the influencing sphere, one of my best friends. Totally honest with each other, get advice from each other, etc. It's tremendous benefit. And then senior mentors, people, they've been your age, but you've never been theirs. And fortunately, I've got some people that I work with here that have been great mentors. Jamie MacGillivray, his name's on the door. I've learned a ton from him over the past few years. Ali Raja, wonderful senior lawyer here at the firm that was a friend to me before I joined the firm, et cetera. But that matters. And if I could give some advice to young people, I would say this: you are the amalgam of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. Choose wisely. You want to be surrounding yourself, or you're surrounding yourself with people who lift you up, who inspire you, who are there for you when you need them, etc. And you want to grow together. You want to grow together. I've seen a lot of people fall by the wayside sometimes because of the company they keep.
Yeah, I think a lot of the types of people that listen to this podcast, especially, they might struggle to find those 5 people in their immediate circle. They look around and decide that they want to go a different path to their high school friends, but then it's like, oh, well, where are these 5 great people that I'm meant to surround myself with? Yeah. But I think it takes time. You can join organizations. You have to put yourself in situations. I think you have to be patient as well. I've moved to new cities a few times in my adult life. I'm trying to stop doing that now for a while. I want this to be the last one for a while. But even things like that, like let's say you start going to a new gym, or you start going to a new coffee shop, and you make it your regular place. It's still going to take 2 or 3 months of people recognizing you before that actually turns into becoming like a home for you.
Agreed. I actually like where this is going, because you're raising some very good points. So talking about, how do you find your tribe? How do you find your people that you want to associate with and cultivate those meaningful relationships with? You gotta get involved. Look, don't waste time. Figure out where to invest your time and do things that are meaningful. And I do think that one thing that men should do is, I would say, it's very important to train. So you brought up going to the gym. Absolutely, men should be going to the gym. And I would also recommend training in a combat sport, a legitimate combat sport, whether it's boxing or Muay Thai or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or wrestling. And I would even say judo. Do one of those. Don't pray for comfort. We need to have resilience as men, and it's important to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. I got some of that, when I was boxing with my friends when I was younger, or I've since spent a period of time more heavily involved in mixed martial arts when I got older. Working on oil rigs certainly wasn't easy. Find ways to challenge yourself, and I think that a physical challenge is pretty important. I know, James, that you've been training and working out, and that's become part of your routine, or it certainly looks like it based on the content that you put out that I've been looking at, which is amazing.
Yeah. And I think you also have to, sorry to interrupt you.
No, go.
I think you have to find the places as well that are a community based. Like, some gyms are shit. Some gyms are just swipe in, headphones on, everybody's doing their own thing. Some gyms you go to, however, it's got a totally different feel. I've been lucky to find one here where people are talking together, people are training together, people are spotting for each other. It's it's the kind of place where people actually want to connect. And there are similar boxing gyms like that, any martial arts studios like that.
No, you're absolutely right. The lifting gyms, while that's a good thing to do, yes, they can be a little more disconnected. But the combat sports gyms, no. One of my former best man, I was talking about CW, is, he's my age, might be a little bit older than me, 47, 48 years old. And he's never been involved in a combat sport. And, him and I talk all the time, and I recommended some books that he reads, and he read them, and he suddenly was very inspired. You know what? I have a family. I should have a baseline capability here. I'm going to commit to this for 6 months. And he joined a Muay Thai gym that is run by a former UFC title contender. And he's been going for several weeks now, and, learning some legitimate skills. And, and he's making it through the 60 or 90 minute workouts. And he goes to the gym early in the morning and lifts weights, but this isn't the same. And he's already seeing the benefits. He's like, oh my God, my physical capability is increasing very quickly. He's enjoying it, and he's sticking with it. And so he said, I was apprehensive about immersing myself in that environment. Here you have a white collar lawyer, and very brilliant, academically inclined guy. I'm going to put myself in this foreign environment that I know nothing about. So obviously, and you're getting a little bit older, there's some apprehension there. And one of the things that he told me is, I cannot believe the fraternity that exists in this gym. You know, everybody's open, everybody's willing to help. He said, it's not at all what I expected. Big egos and people that want to hurt people. Absolutely not. And that hasn't been my experience either. I trained at Titans MMA, the same gym that produced Gavin Tucker and Mike Malott and Roger Hollett and a number of other guys that have been in the UFC. Back when that place was a Shark Tank, with Pete Martell and Kevin Taylor, their names, Kevin Taylor, the jiu-jitsu coach, and Pete, really the MMA coach, although one of the first jiu-jitsu guys in North America, or Canada at least, sorry. Tremendous developmental period in my life between 2007 and maybe 2016, 2017, when I was sort of an avid participant in that sport. And, Gavin Tucker, Mike Malott, two of the best dudes, I've ever known. Warrior poets will say. And that's like, so you said, no headphones. You are talking, you are training together, you're interacting, and that's a good place where you can forge some solid relationships and enjoy some healthy, challenging, solid masculine fraternity, which I think is very important.
I think it has a twofold effect on your character as well. On one hand, it gives you confidence that
Yes.
you're becoming more capable, that you are becoming stronger. It also makes you humble, because everywhere you go, there are people that are stronger than you, people that will kick your ass, people that don't even look like they could kick your ass. They can turn you into a pretzel, So I think it can be humbling, but then you take that environment. It's great to be among kind of the best or the most capable men in that area. And
Yes.
you might feel a little bit humbled or maybe even inadequate compared to those people. But you have to remember that when you actually apply that to the general population, these guys are killers. These guys are the top 1%. So
Yeah.
in a way, it's actually, I think it's good to compare yourself to them and to be humbled by them, because it's still bringing you up. It's that tide that's raising your ship as well.
You're 100% correct. I think that it is one of the most healthy things to do for we'll call it the male ego, is train in a combat sport. And I'll just talk about myself. When I was younger, for a variety of reasons, and this is not an uncommon story, I could be quite precipitous in my behavior, we'll call it. And I started training with Pete Martell in 2007 at Titans MMA. And I'll tell you what, I don't care what kind of athlete you are, how strong you are, what you think your endurance is as a tri or a deca athlete, go into a jiu-jitsu gym and try to grapple a trained opponent, see how that works out for you. So to your point, it's incredibly humbling, but I think that's good, because a lot of people have a very unrealistic perspective on what their capability is in a physical altercation. And I think it's important that and obviously I'm not saying go start an altercation on the street to test yourself. That's not what I'm saying. But it's important to know what you are and you are not capable of. And I think as men, we have a moral and an ethical responsibility to train ourselves. Why? To protect your wife or children. If you're married or you have kids or you have a significant kin other, make no mistake, that's your primary responsibility. You don't outsource your family's protection to, a government agency like the police, who are going to arrive far too late. And I think that should be a real thought for people. Simultaneously, in my opinion, every man, to the extent that they're capable, has a responsibility to be fit enough to save their own life. Run far enough, swim far enough, jump high enough, lift enough weight, whatever kind of misfortune could befall you, you have to be your own first responder. I believe in that very deeply. And I think
That's a very good point.
Yeah. I think that that's one of the other reasons that people should seek that out and get involved in that type of training.
If you're enjoying this podcast, you will love the Gentleman's Digest. This is our weekly newsletter sent straight to your inbox, packed with insights and recommendations. You'll find the link to become a reader in the description.
I think it can be hard to I don't like to use the word motivation, but I think, to be genuinely pushed over the edge where you decide I'm going to make this a part of my life. I think it can be hard for people to have that realization without having some kind of like close call. You know what I mean? Like, I definitely got more into my training after living in Chicago. Not trying to spread any bad stereotypes about that city. But there was, an incident I recall very well. Downtown, I was with a girl, and everything ended up being okay. I was able to diffuse the situation verbally. However, I felt like it was very close to not being that. And I remember leaving that and thinking, you know what, I wish I'd been more prepared, and then started to think about what that was. In the United States, sometimes that includes having a firearm with you as well.
I would add to what we just talked about, if you are in a jurisdiction that allows you to legally own a firearm, I would suggest that it would be very prudent to know how to safely and responsibly use a firearm.
Yeah, it's going to be something I'm quite looking forward to. Now I'm in Texas, actually.
I bet. Yeah. No, 100%. And I really like this saying. Perhaps it's cliche, and I don't know who to attribute it to, but I would say this: it is better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war.
Yeah, I don't know who that is actually. I've got to look it up because I keep hearing it all the time.
Yeah, it's a great quote.
I heard somebody. Well, I'll tell you who it was. Do you know the channel Real Men Real Style? It's like a big YouTube channel, especially back in the day for men's clothing. It was kind of one of the originals.
Okay.
I remember
one of the OG channels.
Yeah, it was the OG really. And we were in Wisconsin together, and a lot of guns in Wisconsin. And he said it's an armed society is a polite society. And I said, yeah, that is true. Until it gets impolite, then it gets very fucking impolite.
Yes. But I, it's funny. When I was younger, I used to have a different perspective on those issues, and with age and wisdom and experience, I would agree with that perspective in what we're discussing now. And these sort of personal revelations came to me over time. Right? Again, I'm closing in on 50 years old, so. My views at different stages of my life might have been a little bit different, but as my father used to say to me, I've been your age, you've never been mine. And as I've got more experience, my perspective on a lot of those issues has shifted. And an armed society is a polite society is a perspective I would subscribe to at this stage of my life.
What would you say were some of the more milestone ages for you? Because I think this year, this is the year that I will turn 28, which sounds like a non-birthday. But I think that's late 20s now. And I still have this sense that the dress rehearsal's kind of over now. You can get away with fucking around for a bit of time when you're a younger man. But I did definitely feel a shift. Not that I would accuse myself necessarily of messing around, but I think time started to feel a little bit more finite for me this year.
Absolutely correct. I completely agree with you. And I do agree with you that the age 27 is an inflection point. And so when I said to you earlier, I wish that I may have been a little more focused in my younger years. I'm talking about pre-27. And so you asked what were some milestones. Obviously, 18-ish is one. For me, that's when I graduated high school and went to undergraduate, right? So moved out of the home, staying at Acadia University, fantastic school. By the way, I've got a lot of good memories from that school in Wolfville, Nova Scotia, small university town. That was a big step. And then graduating from university, I'm working on the rigs and then graduating, staying on the rig. I went to law school, and started my legal career, if I'm not mistaken, at 27 years old. And that's when things got real for me. Now, law school to a degree as well, but stepping out, and I had never been in an office.
Right.
When I started working at that great, big firm, I did not have any sort of white collar experience in my background. Was working in a bar and working on an oil rig was my professional experience. And I'd never even been in an office, didn't own a suit or anything. Obviously I had to go buy that stuff. But a lot of law students, when their students get hired to work at law firms and work over the summer, I didn't do that. I went out west and pushed pipe on land rigs, roughneck for a couple of different drilling contractors. Extreme northern BC, almost in Alaska, and then in the Rocky Mountains in Alberta. I'd go out and work like 80, 85 days straight in the summers. And so when I started articling under, one of the most talented and prolific civil litigators in the province, who was my mentor, now he's a judge on the Nova Scotia Court of Appeal, amazing lawyer. I had no experience. And so 27, fortunately for me, my sister, God love her, was a paralegal for legal aid in another part of the city. And she'd been doing that work for a number of years. And she used to come to the office with me on weekends and really taught me how to do my job when I was an article clerk. Anyway, I'm sorry, I went a pretty far afield there, but 27 was absolutely an inflection point. And that's when I basically decided, like, you got to get real serious about life at this point, and the dress rehearsal is over, as you said so well. And then I would say the next inflection point is sort of, for me, I think it was probably 33. And at 33 years old, I started to do a lot of self-reflection. Who am I? What character flaws exist in me that I should make a concerted effort to address? And what kind of man do I want to be? Because you're moving into maturity at that stage. I think happens a little bit later because of the way society is than it did some years ago. But I was like, okay, you're a mature man. You need to act like it. And, where do I need to improve as a person? And then the next inflection point after that is probably when you pass a threshold to 40, because I strongly believe this. I think it's important for men, young men. One of our purposes is to build value. We need to figure out how to be of use to others, to the people we care about, and society as a whole. Maybe not necessarily all of those things. I think all of those things, but Jordan Peterson says this beautifully, and I subscribe to this wholly. What is the meaning of life? The meaning of life is voluntary self-sacrifice in service to others. The older I get, the more I believe that. So you have to figure out how to be useful. You have to figure out how to add value. You have to create value within yourself. And I think that the time to do that, to when you're building value, is, late teens, 20s, 30s. 40 to early 40s, 40 to 42, 44, that's when you should have arrived to a degree. This is who I am. And then I would say, and a lot of this comes from my father, I can't take credit for this as a completely original idea, that between your early 40s and your early 60s are what I would describe as your power years. That's when you should start reaping the fruits of the discipline you exercised before then. Right? You should have a little bit more autonomy in your life, be it financially or with your time, and you should be able to start enjoying some of the investments you've made in yourself or your career, and have a little bit more freedom. But that's the time, is I think after 40 is when it's like, okay, my path is set, I'm walking it, I'm capable, I'm competent, and I'm just going to improve for the next while. But so that early 40s would be the most recent milestone that I've experienced, and it's been pretty much things have improved. I would say the last 5 years of my life have been the best years of my life by a fairly significant margin. And I'm still aiming up. I still have goals. I'm still progressing, but yeah, I haven't reached the next, we'll say, inflection point past my early 40s.
Yeah. That's
Does that make sense?
interesting. Yeah, it does. I think it's interesting that there's a relatively short gap for you between the 27 and the 33.
Yeah.
But I would imagine that in those 6 years, it feels like a lot has happened.
It did.
A lot has changed.
Yeah, it did. That felt like a significant, like an extended period of time. And then I'll say, early 30s to early 40s went by like that, like much faster, much faster. So, I would say it's important to identify a goal and then take deliberate steps in service to that goal, whatever it is that somebody wants to do. And I think you've gone through some of this yourself, James. If I'm not mistaken, when you were in Chicago, you started out as a journalist and then you moved into a different sphere. And,
Yeah.
do you mind talking about how that process happened for you?
Yeah,
I'm genuinely curious.
It was a little bit before that, actually. So
Okay.
I'd say my early 20s were characterized by trying to find my lane. And I've been a musician since I was a little boy, so that was really the dream for me. But I also grew up in the kind of environment where that wasn't seen as something to pursue necessarily. It was more, that's nice, do that on the weekends. In the meantime, you need to have a real job, a real career. Simultaneously, I discovered journalism at a pretty young age, and I kind of combined the two. So I started doing a music fanzine for the heavy metal genre literally when I was 14. That first issue came out, and it was, this wasn't an online thing. Like, I was going to the post office with my rucksack stuffed full of things going to like Hungary and the United States and South Africa. So I was doing that really as a teenager, and then I got into more mainstream journalism. I started writing for the local newspaper, which at the time was like a big local newspaper. It was like a couple of 100,000 readers. It was the main one for Wales. So I started writing for them when I was 17. That got me into university to do journalism with an unconditional offer, which means like they don't even require you to get any particular grades when you finish high school. It's just you have a place.
Amazing.
So naturally, I probably didn't do as well as I should have done when I graduated. It was a bit demotivating, but I did okay. Then I went to journalism school in London. At the same time, London was like the best place to be as a musician, obviously. So I was really balancing the two for a long time, which I think probably meant that I didn't do either of them that well. I kind of did both to a mediocre level. I had a natural talent for journalism. It was very easy to me. I didn't have to try that hard in a sense. Or like, I think I arrived at college pretty much the same as I left it. In terms of my abilities to write and speak to people and tell a story, I pretty much already had it. So I kind of coasted that 3 years. And then when I left, I was able to get a job at one of the biggest newspapers in the UK called The Sun, which it might be the biggest, but it's certainly not the best. It's very bottom of the barrel kind of journalism. But you know what? It was a job, and it definitely allowed me to go off and do whatever I wanted in the meantime. Now, my attention started to shift after I moved to the United States. So I moved to LA when I was 23 from London, and I was still working for The Sun, but I was starting to get a little bit sick of being a struggling musician. And I was finding other ways to express that artistic side or that creative side. One of them was just in like the way that I would dress. That had started to become a bigger thing for me. But I also really liked the idea of doing a career in advertising. I thought, I can be creative and I can be like Don Draper and,
I think you would be excellent at that, to be honest. Yeah.
I appreciate it. Thank you. And, it was definitely more of a lucrative career than journalism. Because I think especially in the United States, money is very important. And it became more obvious to me. You know, when you're younger, for me at least, I was not thinking about that at all. You know, I thought making 30 grand a year was a lot of money. And then you get to 23 and you realize what that actually gets you. And you go, oh, wait a minute, no. So I joined a college in the evening where I would go and basically, it wasn't a post-grad. It was kind of like a diploma. But the idea was I would do that for a year and I would get a job in the meantime. Afterwards, you know, it would be an entry to like a copywriter or an art director position. Then I in between all of this, I still felt like I had a little, you know, something more to give. And that's when I had the idea to do a YouTube channel. And I pretty much just got started with it right away. You know, it's not like I was sitting on this idea for a long time. It was almost like 2 days later, the first video was up. Yeah.
Wow. What year was this, James?
This will be late 2023.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So then I left LA. I moved to New York, partly for career reasons. You know, the newspaper I was working for had an office in New York. So I went there. And then very, very quickly, over that first 6 months, it started the YouTube. Yeah, it was just YouTube at the time, really. That started making more money than I was getting paid from my day job.
Amazing.
So I thought, wow, I much prefer doing this, you know? Like I would have done it for free. It wasn't something I started with money in mind. It was really about the fulfillment. And I thought, you know, if I get 10K followers and maybe I get to connect with some cool people, that would be really fun for me. So that was that. And then because I no longer had to live in New York for that job, I thought, let's go somewhere else. I went to Chicago, and that's where I was for the next couple of years, up until pretty much around this time 2 years ago. Yeah.
If you're enjoying this podcast, you might like to know that we also have a private members club for like-minded modern gentlemen all over the world. You'll find the link to apply in the description.
That's amazing. Yeah, because we met March of 2025.
Yeah, just about a year ago.
And you had been in it, and obviously I've followed your content since, enjoyed it tremendously, and watched you grow your audience with really a very positive message. And I've really actually enjoyed sort of watching you grow in that sphere over the past year. It's been excellent.
I appreciate that. I feel like I'm moving not only just personally in my life, but having this as a career. Now it's been 2.5 years, and things have been stable, you know, in that sense of like, I don't feel like this is going to disappear tomorrow. But there have also been challenges along that way. You know, things have changed to the point where if I was just still doing what I started off doing, it wouldn't be working anymore. So I have had to adapt along the way. But I feel like the brand where it is now has that longevity. So I'm looking to stabilize that and stabilize myself and see what that next 5 or 10 years or so looks like. And I think especially if you own the business or you're somebody who is very dedicated to their career, like it really is the number one thing in their life, having that stability in your personal life plays a massive role. And that's why I wanted to come back to the US, moved to Austin, bought a car. I'm gonna get a dog soon. You know, there's a lot of stabilizing things happening. Like I'm even in my relationships, I would say for the first time in a long time, I'm actually open to the idea of having a stable relationship, because for the last couple of years, it was like I refused to stop. You know, I was just I was hell bent. You know, so I think even in my romantic relationships, it was. That train was not stopping for anything. Relationships included, cities included, vehicles, friends, pets. Like none of that was on the cards for me because everything was changing all the time. But now I think I'm at the point where actually not changing and having more stability would probably be an asset.
I would agree with you. Especially at the stage of your life that you're at now. And I do think it makes sense to me that as you embarked on this life change, switching from journalism to to your online presence and everything that comes with that, I think that you would have to pursue that in order to be successful with a degree of monastic obsession that would preclude other stabilizing forces in your life. I think that you've done that, and you're at that inflection point. I think you're 27, correct, James?
Yeah, I turned 28 in 2 months. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're at that inflection point, and I do think that, if I were to look back, I didn't invite sort of those stabilizing forces until I was older than you are now. But I think that I could have, and probably to personal benefit. So that does make a lot of sense to me, especially since your chosen career path has started to stabilize, and you're like, okay, I know what this looks like. It's not going to go away immediately. I know where to invest my effort. You've got some experience with it now, and it's like I can invite more stability in other areas of your life. And I do think that a degree of stability as a man matures becomes important, to stay grounded and committed to things.
Yeah, it definitely does. I think it's kind of like a scientific experiment as well. If you're changing all of the variables all the time, you don't know what's working and what isn't. And I think that there is a time of, kind of an explosion where everything is just changing and nothing is good enough, and you don't want to settle for anything. And I think that can be good. It's very difficult for the people. Very difficult for the people around you, to be honest.
Yes.
But
yes.
Just in yourself,
because it can be a selfish existence.
It can
when
be.
you're in that phase.
Yeah, and I think I would say that I've observed maybe from some older men that weren't able to get off that train as well. Like, were never happy. No woman was ever good enough, or the quantity of one was never enough. No level of money was ever enough, and I admire them, and I think they're very successful, and I try to learn what I can from them. But I also see the downsides of that. So I'm trying to pick the best of both worlds, really.
Yeah, well, I like your perspective, and you seem to be thinking about important things that really matter, and I agree with all of that. And so for me, I relentlessly pursued a degree of professional success at to the detriment of many, many other areas of my life. And when I was 33 and I started to engage in some deep self-reflection, one of the things that I wrestled with at that period of my life was there is an element of this that is incredibly selfish and alienating, whereas you don't have maybe some of those more stable relationships in your life, or they don't achieve the deep meaning that they could or should. And that's when I started to shift gears, and I was like, okay, I need to take a look at my priorities and not just what I'm doing in terms of pursuing this career. How can I say this? What do I want my life to look like? And in addition to this profession and doing reasonably well there, what else is important? And so that was sort of part of that developmental phase for me. And that type of reflection and taking stock of what's going on and what's important to you, and who do you want to be, and what do you want to aspire to, I think is really, really important. I think that a lot of people in the world do not introspect, and they do not reflect on themselves, and to their detriment, right? I think self-awareness is really, really important.
I think a lot of the reason for that is if you don't have self-agency, or you don't believe that you are in control, there's no point reflecting, because your reflections would go nowhere. It's only people that see their life kind of like the chessboard that want to sit and look at the pieces for a while.
Agreed. One of the phrases that I really like, it's actually on the inside of my jacket. It says memento mori, the Latin phrase. I'm sure everybody's familiar with it, but it means remember death, or remember you will die. And I love that thought, not as a morbid fixation on mortality, but as inspiration. You will die. Your time is finite. Therefore, make the highest and best use of it that you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And did you find that when you did start to recalibrate some aspects of your life and maybe put more of a value on relationships or family or whatever it was for you that you were neglecting, did that fear come true that it actually had a negative impact on your career, or do you think it was really the opposite?
I think in the fullness of time, it became the opposite. I grew up, and as I said, I was raised by my father from a relatively young age. Now, he did meet a young lady who became my stepmother, Diana. Fantastic mother figure, love her to death, and she brought a lot of things to the family that I hadn't experienced previously, family dinners every night, and very, very involved in my life and what I was doing, and really one of my biggest cheerleaders as I aged. But for whatever reason, and maybe it was my prior experience, I didn't want to get married. It wasn't something that interested me. I wanted to pursue my career, and I saw, for whatever reason, I saw marriage perhaps as a liability. And I was, in my early 30s looking at it and not prioritizing relationships and just pursuit of, success, whatever that means, and at the expense of everything else. And it took time for me to rectify or mitigate sort of the character flaws that I observed in myself. This isn't something that you do overnight. But as I grew and matured and my worldview shifted, I became open to a degree to that in my life. And then, what was it? It was April 11th, 2021, when I first laid eyes on my wife, Samantha. She walked into a room. I was at a wine and oyster bar, and she walked around the podium after speaking to the maitre d', and I remember hearing her voice, and I looked over, and I knew the instant I laid eyes on her, I'm going to marry this woman. And she came and sat down beside me, and we started speaking, and we would have got married sooner, but it was during the lockdowns, et cetera, and society was sort of turned upside down. And but it was 2 years to the day that I first laid eyes on her that we were married.
Oh, wow.
So we married on April 11th, 2023. Just to finish.
Yeah.
So tremendously wonderful. My perspective on marriage has changed tremendously. I think that it has improved me tremendously as a man. The time that I've been with Samantha have been the best years of my life. And it's wonderful. And it's something that I think is important. And I would say is even sort of, anyway, I'll just say that it's been positive. It's been very, very positive. I wouldn't trade her for anything. And my life has definitely improved with her in it.
Do you think you were...
And you met my wife, actually.
I did. So I know exactly what you're talking about. I think it's really important for a man to, for all of the private or public preferences you may have, I think a wife that represents you really well. And I think that's what Samantha is for you. And I've been, had the pleasure of meeting other men who you meet their wife and you just think, wow, what a real asset this woman is to him. Where, if it were my wife and let's say you need to go off and talk to somebody else for 10 minutes or you're hosting a party and she's, being a host, I think you need somebody that you are proud to say represents you.
I agree completely. And I do think that that's important. So, I do think marriage is positive, but who you choose for a spouse is one of the most important decisions you will ever make in your life. And it is something that needs to be made judiciously and with a degree of wisdom. And Samantha exuded characteristics that I would attribute to a life mate, or my perspective of what would be important in a life mate, and you know, she just emanated these things, and I was really, really drawn to her in a way that I have never experienced before in my life, and it has been tremendously positive. And there is no place that I would not love to have her by my side. There's no person that I would not want to introduce her to, or anything I'd want to involve her in. I mean, obviously, I'm talking about safe environments and activities, but no. And I'm very proud of her. I'm proud that she's my wife, and yeah, I agree with what you're saying wholeheartedly.
Yeah. Do you think you were open to meeting that person when you did meet her, or was it like she turned that plan on its head somewhat?
No, I was open. I was open at that point in my life. I was very open to that, but simultaneously, I would say, you know, it's something that I would approach very, very judiciously with open eyes. Yeah.
Yeah, I was talking with a friend of mine who goes on a lot of dates. I'd say is more like what we would describe as a serial dater. And, yes, you know, we take the piss out of each other all the time, but I'm saying, you know, like, you know, what is the point of all of this? Like, when does this stop as well? Because I think personally I would find that tiring.
I would.
So, you know, I said, you know, kind of like, where do you think this is going? And he says, you know, I'm open when I meet the right one. You know, when she ticks all the boxes, then I'm happy, you know, to go with her. But I challenged that and I said, I think you have to decide that you are open and that it's something that you're looking for, or at least you want to invite into your life, rather than just, it's like, a funny analogy, but when I was looking for dogs, I went to the adoption center, and you know, you have this romantic point of view that you're going to walk through all the kennels, and then one is just there with the big puppy eyes, and you call its name, and it's coming up to you, and it sits when you say sit, and like you have that instant kind of connection.
Yes.
I don't think that ever happens, you know, certainly not with dogs. And I do think that human relationships are a bit more like that, where you have to decide that you're going to be able to put in the work, and you have to decide that you're going to be open to that. Nobody's gonna come like screaming and knocking on the door saying I'm the perfect person and everything's gonna be a breeze from now on, and you won't want to date anybody else, and I'm everything you've ever looked for, you know?
Yes, I think that cinema and various entertainment media have sort of negatively affected people's perspectives on many things in life, one of them being romantic relationships. You know, two sides to it. There's this idea of the, you know, Walt Disney love story, and then on the other end of that, you have this, what I observe to be like these incredibly superficial transactional relationships between people, which certainly is not healthy or productive, and certainly not conducive to a long-term commitment. So I do think that it's important to have a grounded, realistic perspective on these things. You know, the romantic comedy, that's nonsense. You know, you have to commit to things, and things take work and effort. And like anything else, you get out of it what you put into it, you know, and I do think that it is very important to consciously prioritize, if it's an appropriate relationship, to prioritize that relationship. And one of my shortcomings in my youth was that I didn't appropriately prioritize them, and if I wasn't prepared to do that in a situation where somebody cared for me very much, then what the heck was I doing? So, you know, that was one of the things when I was taking stock of myself. You know, one of the things that I thought needed pretty significant correction was that aspect of my life. And, you know, through concerted effort and self-reflection and introspection, reading many books, you know, I got to a place where I'm like, okay, you know, this is something that I would like to do, but it's, you know, you have to make, I would suggest you have to make a conscious choice, and then make good choices after that, which fortunately I think I've done well, and it's been tremendously beneficial to me. And I have a wonderful relationship with a woman that I love dearly. But,
I think
you have to be intentionality, I think, is the word I'm looking for. You have to be intentional about it.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up the Hollywood kind of romantic ideal, because that's something that I've been dissecting myself a lot in my relationships or my expectations of relationships. I would say that especially for men or women that have done a lot of self-reflection, they've done a lot of work on themselves, they don't need somebody else in their life. They're actually quite a happy, balanced person. The idea that somebody's going to walk in and your whole world is going to turn upside down and you can't eat, sleep, or breathe without them, I don't think that's going to happen, actually, because you haven't got this hole inside you for somebody to fill. If you feel full, then it doesn't mean you're not going to love them and the relationship won't be wonderful. But I think that overly romanticized, idealized version of love that we get in movies and books and music, I think that happens for some people, but I think we're trying to like compare a healthy relationship to this unhealthy drug addiction kind of relationship.
Absolutely. Do not think that if you are an unhappy person or you're dissatisfied or you're lonely or whatever you might be suffering from, that a relationship is going to make you happy. That is absolutely fallacious. You need to be secure in yourself. You need to have your own mission, your own destination. You need to be intentional about your life, and you need to be happy with who you are and you know, either what you're trying to accomplish if you're not there yet or what you're doing, and find somebody in a similar state. I agree with you completely, and I love your drug addiction analogy. You know, we all know that addictions are not healthy, and you cannot be looking to be fulfilled by somebody else. You have to find fulfillment in yourself, and you have to go into a relationship, if it's a serious committed relationship, in the spirit of giving, not receiving.
There's a great book I love called The Art of Loving. Are you familiar with that one?
No, I'm not.
Okay, I'll give you the synopsis. Basically, the concept is that to love somebody is more of an act than just a feeling. You know, if you feel you love somebody or you say you love somebody, that isn't what love is. The love is actually doing the things. And I think we feel that with all of the things we do. We feel that even with our work. You know, it's no good saying I work so hard or I'm so good at my job. What actually makes you that is when you sit down and do the work.
Yes.
So it's basically that idea for human relationships, and I think I would say that that's definitely something that I probably didn't do. Was I expected that all of those things would fall into place naturally if it were the right person, but really I was, I had a one-track mind about my life. And I'm glad I did. You know, it's like not like that I regret that or I would want to turn back the time. But I've learned that inviting other healthy things into my life makes everything else better. And I even thought about that with the dog. It's, you know, a bit of a commitment. You think, well, do I want to have to take this dog out every morning? It's going to shit. I have to pick it up. But I think, well, that's really just a form of discipline, isn't it? And if you give a pet to a very undisciplined person who doesn't have their life together, you typically see that they get their life in way better shape because they now have to care for this thing. So I think that actually adding that layer would be a really positive move.
Yeah. And I mean, what you're speaking about, I think your trajectory has been very healthy. You know, I mean, you've invested in your current career path and your current aspirations to a level of stability. And now you're saying, okay, I have stability in my life. And now I'm in a place where I can responsibly add in these other things. Right. And that makes eminent sense to me. And again, it's a similar inflection point to when I was sort of looking at my life and saying, okay, like I know what my path is and I have to continue to invest in that. Came to the relational piece later, but you know, it seems to me that you're doing things in a logical sequence that makes eminent sense.
I appreciate you saying that because there's no guidebook, you know, so it's only really people that, as you say, that, you know, you've been my age, I haven't been yours, so it's reassuring to hear that. Yeah. Just on a lighter note as well. Sure. There's a story you told me about. I think it was your first date with your wife. It might have been a different date where you would wear a suit and tie on your dates, and her reaction was like, I've never been out to dinner with a man wearing this. So could you remind me of what that was?
Yeah, so that actually wasn't when I first met my wife. But when I got into the law business and got to a place in my life where professionally I'm wearing suits every day, and the law firm that I was at was very much sort of like the suits culture from the TV show, less dramatic but similar kind of environment, and then you start doing that all the time, and I know you wear suits a lot, and so I would go on dates at that back then. When I was sort of in my early 30s, and I got that reaction a lot from women that I might be going out with, when it's like, I've never ever been out with a guy in a suit, and almost universal reaction. And I know that you enjoy wearing suits, James. I don't know if that's consistent with your experience. It's the same today.
It definitely, I'd say it can be. Probably in Austin more so, for sure. Very, very casual place. Yeah, I think for the most part, just, my generation of men wear suits less and less. I don't know what it's like at your firm, but, law is probably one of the few industries where people are still wearing suits on a consistent basis. So, yeah, but maybe things have changed. Maybe you can enlighten me.
Things have changed.
What's going on, like day-to-day dress code?
Prior to the COVID era, it's still what you would expect, business casual at least, but very much suit and tie, certainly at my previous law firm. Since COVID, I have attended, there's a legal process called a discovery. In the United States, they'd call it a deposition, where the witnesses to a lawsuit can be questioned by lawyers for the other side. And, there's a court reporter there. It's recorded. It's historically like a pretty formal process, not quite as formal as court, but, you'd show up in a suit and tie. And in the post-COVID era, I'm seeing lawyers show up in like jeans and a polo and sneakers. Like, wow. I don't do that, but I'm shocked by that. And it's become quite pervasive throughout the industry, where I see a lot of lawyers not dressing the way that historically they would. Obviously, if you're in court in front of a judge, you're going to be wearing a suit, but I see lawyers dressed very casually a lot of the time in situations where I don't personally do that. I'm a shirt and tie guy, but yeah, it has changed, and I noticed the shift pre and post COVID is when it's been really sort of discernible. Is it going to swing back in the other direction? Who knows? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm curious if you think law still has a kind of attraction for some men because they get to play that role, because of the respectability, because of the dress, because of the kind of authority of the job. If one of those elements starts going away, does that actually become a less attractive career? I know it sounds kind of theatrical, but this is the reality that you live day to day, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that is a very legitimate question, and I do wonder. I think about this sometimes. How is technology going to impact this profession, and are we going to see some pretty significant changes? I don't know the answer to that, but it's certainly a possibility. It's certainly a possibility. And in fact, I was having a conversation pretty recently with Dimitri Tuxer, who we spoke about earlier. And he said to me, you're in a good profession in the West. He said, because there are many countries where, law is not, what would we call it? I mean, not the same type of profession that it is in Canada, or perhaps it is in the United States, where being a lawyer has a very different place in society, which is much lower than it is in the West. So you raise an interesting question, and I had never thought about that. And he listed, he's a very worldly gentleman who's been all over the world, and he listed a variety of countries where it's in a very different milieu than it is in the West, and I didn't realize that. So would that change the appeal? Yeah, I think it would for a lot of people, obviously.
Yeah, I think so. For me, growing up, I always wanted to be an adult. I was one of those boys. I couldn't wait to be like a grown man. So in a parallel universe, I can see why that would have really appealed to me if I had been a bit more that way inclined academically. Oh, well, I get to do law. I get to dress up nice. I get to be in court. I was a bit of an actor when I was younger. I was always involved in the productions and stuff. So it's like, you get to perform in a sense.
I can see that.
Yeah, so I can see in a different world.
Yeah, but my perspective on my career has changed, and I'm going to speak for a moment about one of the persons I described as a mentor, Ali Raja, or Papa Raja, as I affectionately refer to him at the firm. He's one of the office dads to many of us. And when I was when I joined my first law firm, it was the preeminent law firm in Atlantic Canada, and I wanted to work there because that's where the best worked, and I wanted to learn from the best, or who reputationally broadly understood to be the best. And I was able to do that. 5 of the lawyers that I worked with have gone on to become judges, either in the Supreme Court of Nova Scotia or the Nova Scotia Court of Appeal. Really, like, brilliant, talented people. And any degree of success I've had in this profession can significantly be attributed to them and the things I learned working with them and for them. And then one of the biggest clients that I was involved with invited me to work for them directly. And I did. So I was at the big defense firm from 2007 to 2013. From 2013 to 2020, I was with Canada's largest property and casualty insurer, doing defense work for them. And then in 2020, the founding partner of the biggest plaintiffs firm in my province, Nova Scotia, although we operate all throughout Atlantic Canada, MacGillivray Law, Jamie MacGillivray called me and invited me to join the plaintiffs firm. And I was very reluctant to do that. I didn't know what the experience would be like working for the general public, for working for citizens directly rather than big corporations or insurance companies, or that. And so I questioned my ability to do that well, and how would I adapt to that environment. And Ali Raja, a good friend of mine, said, look, I think you should do this, and I think your perspective on many things is going to change fairly rapidly. And so I did accept the opportunity. And now I work for individuals. I work for citizens who are going against large insurance companies or other entities. And I can tell you, James, when I talked about the meaning of life as described by Jordan Peterson, being voluntary self-sacrifice in service to others, I gained far, far more utility for my career today working for people who need help than I did working for large faceless corporations. And not that there isn't important work that need to be done for those entities. I'm not trying to cast aspersions on the people that do that work. I did it for many years, and in that career, that time in my career was very good to me. But I can tell you that when I can deliver positive results for people who need help against larger institutional defendants, there is a nobility in that I really appreciate, and I'm incredibly thankful that I accepted this opportunity to do this.
I can totally imagine that. I think that's a beautiful note to end on as well. As much as we're gonna have to get you back because we didn't even get onto watches and so many
oh
things.
My Lord.
We could probably crack open a bottle of bourbon and do this for 7 hours or so. But thank you so much.
Wow. I can't believe how quickly the time passed.
I know. That's what I say. It's not really work doing this.
No.
But thank you so much. I think this is going to be a really inspirational conversation for a lot of men out there listening. And I'm really glad that we got the opportunity to bring you on and have your voice.
Thank you, James. And if I may, just before we depart,
Of course.
I do want to reiterate, I think that what you're doing, I think your platform and the way that you're using it is incredibly inspirational. You are a person I would consider a junior mentor, somebody younger than myself that I get a lot of inspiration in, who I learn from. I enjoy our interactions and our conversation tremendously. And I love that you're putting out a positive message and that you have a community for young men to look to for, advice, inspiration, etc. I think there's incredible nobility in what you're doing. And I sincerely appreciate the invitation to come and speak to you in this fashion. Thank you so much.
Hey, we're doing it again. No question. Hopefully in person. Wherever we are in the world, we'll get it together. Absolutely.